With Sinners winning so many Oscars and Vampire Lestat arriving in June, it's a great year to be loving vampires. I want to celebrate by talking about vampires throughout cinema, how they've changed while society evolves. Because if you look at vampires across film history, something interesting happens. They keep on transforming. Sometimes they're monsters. Sometimes they're tragic philosophers. And sometimes I don't know, like brooding teenagers.
This is the skin of a killer, Bill.
And those changes aren't random. They reflect something about us as a society. Our fears, our fantasies, what each generation finds seductive or terrifying. To make sense of it all, I like to think of vampire cinema as 5 stages. So let's take a look at them. Films like Nosferatu or Dracula introduced the vampire as pure horror. They were meant to terrify audiences, not for them to be liked. These movies appeared in the early 1930s, a generation shaped by the World War I and the Great Depression. And at that time, the world felt unstable and threatening, which is why it's normal that the monsters on the screen reflected that.
Don't kill me! Let me live, please! Punish me, torture me, but let me live!
Take her, Louis! End her suffering! And yours! No.
By the end of the 20th century, after decades of war and cultural questioning, the audiences weren't as interested in vampires as monsters as they were into complicated characters.
You think he might be a vampire? That would be so awesome!
And so the vampire evolves from the villain to the main character.
It's finger licking good.
Films like Interview with a Vampire 1994 and Near Dark reflect on this shift. The vampire here is no longer just a predator, it's a being that's struggling against its own nature. It wonders whether if eternal life is a blessing or a curse. Even the classic Dracula is rewritten through this lens. He's a being that's looking for love and meaning after centuries of existence.
I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
In my opinion, this reflects on a generation way more interested in psychology and identity. We no longer want to fear, we want to understand the creature.
Who am I? Who am I?
The 1990s were a decade obsessed with reinvention, rebellion, style, and genre blending.
Surprise, Sydney.
Cinema was experimenting with genres, and vampires became a part of that experimentation. Suddenly, the creature of gothic horror was thrown into action movies, comedy horror, and pop culture spectacles.
Dad?
Blade and the creatures in From Dusk Till Dawn are no longer tragic. They're cool, fast, stylish, violent. These characters can be either villains, heroes, or something in between. That doesn't really matter. What actually matters is the energy.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a very interesting case because it acts as a bridge between horror, action, and teenage drama.
Out for a walk, bitch.
Which leads us directly to the next phase. The target audience here is teenagers, specifically teenage girls. And yeah, they can watch action movies, but they're more into romance. Twilight or The Vampire Diaries make a love story out of the vampire. This reflects on a generation growing up in a media landscape focused on relationships, identity, and emotional drama. The vampire becomes a metaphor for overwhelming feelings such as loneliness, obsession, desire, and one rule becomes almost universal. The vampire can be toxic. The vampire can be evil. But the vampire always, and I mean always, has to be extremely attractive.
I like big boys, itty bitty boys, Mississippi boys, inner city boys. I like the pretty boys with the bow tie. Get your nails did, let it blow dry.
And once the genre has explored horror, tragedy, action, and romance, we were ready to combine it all.
How long have you been dead?
I think that this is perfection. I may be biased, but this is my generation. Modern audiences are comfortable with contradiction. We're used to characters who are complicated, morally messy, and sometimes impossible to categorize.
Y'all clean?
Sure.
These characters are still predators, capable of cruelty and violence, but they're also painfully self-aware. They argue about morality, identity, power, memory. They are monsters who spend eternity wondering what that actually means.
They took my wife. Oh, God.
I'm a coward, ain't I?
But our modern stories understand something important as well, which is that vampires are supposed to be dangerous. That is why Sinners or Interview with a Vampire are such important representations. They bring back the sense that the vampire is not just romantic or tragic, but fundamentally predatory. The violence, the hunger, the darkness of the myth, they're all still here, bringing it all to full circle. In conclusion, I feel like the monster never disappears. We just give it a different voice, depending on our worldview. And that's why they're never going away. They may not exist, but we as a society have made vampires immortal.